Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
He'll claim he's making America great again without even taking office. On the second working day of the year, President-elect Donald Trump has been using social media to further his own agenda, both externally, in the case of China and North Korea, and internally against House Republicans and against America's big car manufacturers. After tweeting against General Motors, this afternoon Ford announced it was relocating a future car plant back from Mexico to Michigan. On Sunday, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un welcomed the new year with a message designed surely to test America. Pyongyang was on the verge of testing an intercontinental ballistic missile, which could possibly touch American soil. Donald Trump fired back with a New Year message of his own last night, taking to Twitter to tell Mr. Kim it won't happen. Then, for good measure, Mr. Trump vented his annoyance with China with another tweet saying,
China has been taking out massive amounts of money and wealth from the US in totally one-sided trade, but won't help with North Korea. Nice.
The Chinese appeared to shrug off the comment, saying its policy on North Korea speaks for itself.
The effort China has made to this end is obvious to all. We hope all sides can refrain from speaking or doing anything that can aggravate the situation.
No mention today of his growing warmth for Russian President Vladimir Putin. But Mr. Trump did have plenty of ire for America's biggest car manufacturing company, General Motors. Again, he took to social media to accuse it of manufacturing some of its cars in Mexico, telling it to make them in America or pay more tax. General Motors hit back, saying most of its cars were indeed made in the United States. But then hours later, Ford announced it was cancelling plans for a new billion-dollar plant in Mexico to focus production in America. So is Donald Trump making America great again? Where do we stand then in the complexities of the New World Order at the start of 2017? With me in the studio, the former British ambassador to Russia, Sir Tony Brenton, and we're joined from Washington by the former director of the Central Intelligence and head of the CIA, Jim Woolsey. Jim Woolsey, let's just start with the tweets. Is that to be the presidential style, would you say? And will it be one which leaves your old colleagues at the CIA and even the State Department relaxed?
Well, we have a good deal more complicated things to communicate to one another, I believe, than can be done with tweets. This is a new thing for us as well as for much of the rest of the world. Social media can change a great deal when they affect communications, like the printing press, for example. And the new world that we live in which the social media electronic can move so fast, is something that we're all going to have to get used to, and it's substantially different than trying to deal with the world in a normal fashion.
Let's just take it a little further. I mean, the idea that the international relations are going to be conducted by 140 characters is dangerous indeed, is it not?
Yes, it is. I mean, as Jim Woolsey has said, you've got quite a lot of quite sophisticated things that you need to say to each other, and you can't do that in a tweet. And indeed, they say about diplomacy that you always lie between a banality and an indiscretion. And Mr. Trump obviously prefers the indiscretion side of that balance. The fact is that...
Well, there's nothing that says that he's going to solely participate in tweeting and Twitter. That this may be something that is done for individual purposes, but not for much or the majority of our communications in diplomacy and government. Okay. But it is, for what it's being used for now, it is quite startling in terms of its impact.
Okay, well, let's just look at some of the real issues that are threatening. And many people really do regard the world as suddenly having plunged into a very dangerous place, where you have a resurgent Russia, you have a very active China, with its islands there in the Pacific, and the rest of it is man-made islands, and you have a retreating America, even though the incoming president seems to be out to reverse that. And what do you make?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the world order is changing. The old, what was called the holiday from history, in which the West completely dominated the world after the Cold War, is now visibly ending. And we've got a very complicated job, particularly in the United States, of adapting to that. And China seems to me to be the most obvious flashpoint, actually, given that Mr. Trump is taking on China on all sorts of fronts. You mentioned Russia, which I know particularly, and that is one of the few areas where I find some merit in what Mr. Trump has had to say, because it is quite clear that our policies towards Russia have failed. Sanctions have not changed Russian policy. And we have one very big shared interest with Russia, which is fighting the people who are really killing Americans and killing Brits, which is ISIS. And I think his idea and his new National Security Director's idea of finding a shared approach to tackling ISIS is a good one and a basis possibly for cooperation in other areas as well.
Jim Woolsey?
I agree, and I think there's another very serious problem on the horizon, and that is Iran, because Iran is not only a technologically relatively sophisticated society, it is one that operates its government, the Revolutionary Guards and the rest, on an extraordinarily pungent ideology. And we have, Bernard Lewis says that during the Cold War, mutual assured destruction was a deterrent, but unfortunately now in dealing with that part of the world, he says it may be an inducement, and that is a very serious problem emanating rather directly from the Iranians' religious views.
Iran?
Well, we thought we had the Iran problem solved, of course. We thought that we had an agreement, and as far as I can see, that agreement is kind of working. So I rather hope that Mr. Trump will change his mind about Iran. Another obvious area where we have a real problem is obviously
no American that I know that has studied this awful agreement thinks it is anything better than the worst agreement the United States has ever signed in international affairs.
Well,
totally
non-functional,
deceptive.
With respect, America's never been a great expert on matters Iranian. Let me just hear the British ambassador here, the ex of Moscow.
Yeah, I don't want to get into a disagreement with Jim, but obviously a lot of people do think this agreement is successful. The US performance in the Middle East, sadly, has been one of failure. Failure in Iraq, failure with regard to Egypt, failure in Libya, and to take on Iran as well is probably adding to a rather poor record. The area that I did want to refer to, however, is cyber warfare, where the US has had a direct experience of Russian action against them. They have retaliated, I suspect ineffectively, because no sanction against Russia has ever worked. And this is another area where at the moment you have a no-rules zone. You have a great power free-for-all in cyber warfare. And it's another area where I think the United States, the United Kingdom, other powers should be looking for a non-aggression pact to try and get that area under control as well.
So Tony Brenton, Jim Woolsey, thank you very much. I wish we had more time. There's much more to discuss. Thank you very much.
I've been getting away with it all my